Hello students, today we will be discussing another very interesting topic of this urban ecosystem, and that is imbalances and challenges. And this is not only interesting, this is also very significant. So if we remember what we have discussed in last two classes, that is urban carbon and methane, urban climate, heat island, heat wave and heat stress. And today we are planning to cover ecosystem imbalance, urban critical zone, dimensions of ecosystem imbalance, and measurement of this particular imbalance. So let us see what is imbalance. If you remember, when we had discussed urban ecosystem, we started with this definition that these are the ecological systems within cities where built infrastructure and high population density, they drive complex interactions among the biophysical, social, economic and institutional factors. And all these things together, that means human interventions as well as these factors together collectively shape the ecological processes and functions within these human dominated landscapes. And that is urban ecosystems. So, that way it is different from the natural ecosystem. Urban ecosystem imbalance. So, obviously, what it is going to tell us, that is very important. Why this imbalance happens? It happens because anthropogenic pressures like altered land cover, pollution, and species introductions. All these disrupt the natural structure, function, and resilience of urban ecological systems. And often they result in novel ecosystems, a new ecosystem with impaired ecological integrity. So, when these interventions happen, it's a new one, but it's not a properly connected one, it's an impaired one. Imbalances often result in ecosystems with new species combinations and altered abiotic conditions. You take out the soil, you bring the structured soil. Something is continuously happening within the urban ecosystem. So, we are also altering both biotic and abiotic conditions. So, what happens as a result? Native biodiversity and ecological functions they get reduced. Key ecosystem processes like nutrient cycling, energy flow, and habitat connectivity, these become fragmented or dysfunctional. So that's the way that urban ecosystem is gradually experiencing imbalances. So urban ecosystem can remain balanced when these inputs of energy, water, food and materials from the hinterland is efficiently cycled and feedback loops maintain the equilibrium between the resource demand and the emissions and the waste assimilation. So if you consider this image, this is the city where the functions are going on. These are the inputs: energy, water, food, and matter. And the inputs, that's the demand driven, is coming to the city through the processes. Emissions are happening, is the waste disposal. We also get goods out of this, and we are having a hinterland is having a stock, and also it's a resource, it's a sink. It actually have both the characters. In a balanced system, this demand and the emissions, they are having a balance, and the feedback is always helping to keep this balance. But in case of an imbalanced system, we will see how this feedback system is not being able to maintain the balance between the demand and the emission, and that is the imbalance. Imbalance occurs when urban demand and waste outputs exceed the ecosystem's regenerative capacities, and it leads to pollution, depletion, and disrupted socio-ecological feedbacks, which I was mentioning here. Now we will be discussing a very interesting terminology, that is the urban critical zone. What it is, it's a dynamic layer of Earth's surface where urban land, water, energy, and human systems constantly interact. This is the underlying regolith, this is the soil, this is the water, this is the vegetation. In an urban area or in any normal natural ecosystem also, they continuously have interactions. We see this flow of water cycle, CO2, carbon cycle. These are continuous processes. What is happening in the urban critical zones? Air, water, and soil are actually now having many different geochemical processes. We discussed the biogeochemical processes, and it is bringing pollution. Urban waste is getting created, land use has changed, and we can see the effect. Urban heat island effect is coming. So these are new thing. So the atmosphere is now having a critical condition, and we call it urban critical zone. And in addition to that, if the disaster happens, nothing like that. It is going to face further challenges. And if you remember the terminology anthroposphere, that's a much bigger thing which is interacting with all the spheres. And urban critical zone is within the urban area only. It is not going beyond that urban canopy layer. And this is the subset of anthroposphere. This urban critical zone illustrates how socioeconomic growth drivers reshape the ecological systems, creating the feedbacks that determine the sustainability or imbalance. So, either the positive one is the sustainable one or the negative one is the imbalanced one. Let us see how urbanization is having a relation with this urban critical zone. What are the expressions of urbanization? Population, land is modified, industrial upgrade is happening, lot of products are coming out of the system. It's a regional economic development is getting driven through this urbanization process. What are the effects? If we try to see towards that, we see changes in the structure, process, and the functions of the ecosystem. That is the very, very pertinent change we see in the urban ecosystem. Deallocation of resources. The resources, like you imagine mines, where we are having the minerals. When we do the mining, then it is coming out of that particular location where it was supposed to stay for longer period. So that is deallocation. And what we are doing with these resources? We are reallocating them to other industries. So deallocation is a very strong effect of urbanization. We can also see multiple social and economic impacts. And as rightly pointed out, it can lead to regional sustainable development, provided everything goes right. So, this is a good explanation of this urbanization, urban ecosystem, and the urban critical zone. Now, let us continue this discussion. What is the role of urbanization in this urban critical zone? It acts actually as a transformative force within this zone, the interface where human, ecological, and geophysical systems interact. So, population growth, land conversion, and industrial expansion, they alter ecosystem structure, process, and resource allocation. Just now, I was discussing the deallocation and the allocation. So, you could easily understand that, leading to both regional imbalances and opportunities for sustainable development. So it's always good and bad together. We can see here the same thing. When the rate of change in land use, industry, and population exceeds the ecosystem's adaptive capacity, we also discuss the regenerative capacity. We are discussing here the adaptive capacity. So, the capacity of that ecosystem is very important. Then, if once it is getting exceeded, then the imbalances emerge. But with smart planning and management, we can actually drive them towards a sustainable transformation as well. Now we will come to the dimensions of ecosystem imbalance. There are this biophysical, ecological, chemical, socio-ecological, economic, institutional, and temporal dimensions of this ecosystem imbalances. First, we will establish the scope for each dimensions of this ecosystem imbalance and then key processes and examples for each one of them we will discuss. Biophysical, all of us we have very good idea by now what biophysical means. And biophysical dimensions of ecosystem imbalance will deal with the alteration of the natural flows of energy, water, carbon, and nutrients, and which are caused by the urban expansion and impervious surfaces. Cities are disrupting the natural land atmosphere and any other sphere interactions for that matter and create microclimatic anomalies. The key processes like UHI, which affect due to the heat storage in concrete and asphalt, reduced evapotranspiration, and as the soil is sealed, infiltration is also reduced, and which will lead us to low groundwater recharge. Then disrupted carbon and energy exchange that increases the anthropogenic heat flux. What are the good examples to remember this biophysical imbalance? Delhi and Ahmedabad both have been in the news for these extreme heat waves in recent decades continuously. 3 to 6 degree temperature rise above the surroundings is very common in these cities. What Mumbai is facing? Chronic flooding due to reduced permeable surface area. Gurugram has a flow through, has a river, Sahibi River, which has been considered ecologically dead due to pollution, construction, and lack of infrastructure, and leading to severe flooding issues. So many biophysical imbalances we can see around us in the urban ecosystem. Ecological dimension. This dimension captures the loss, fragmentation, and degradation of habitats, which support the biodiversity and ecological networks. As we know, urbanization replaces complex, self regulating natural ecosystems, and which it brings simplified and human dominated system. The key processes involved are habitat fragmentation and isolation of green patches, decline in native flora fauna, proliferation of invasive non native species. Loss of ecological connectivity is another process. Pollinator corridors, wetlands, we are losing them. What are the examples? Bengaluru's lakes are good example for it, which are encroached and disconnected and so polluted. So loss of wetland dependent species are there. Bangalore's rivers like Arkavati, Bishavavati, now they lost their environmental flow and they are drying. Uh, Another very good example from Mumbai, Sanjay Gandhi National Park, which is leading to shrinking wildlife corridors and human animal conflict. So, these are very important examples of ecological dimensions. Chemical dimensions, urban ecosystems are the chemical reactors where emissions, waste, and pollutants accumulate faster than the natural systems and can absorb or neutralize them as well through interventions. And these chemical activities in the urban ecosystem alters the biogeochemical cycles and contaminates air, soil, and water as a result. What are the key processes? Elevated GHGs all leads to smog, acid rains, and the ozone formation. Heavy metals and microplastics are now coming to soil and water bodies. Nutrient imbalances, nitrogen and phosphorus is running off, and which is actually causing eutrophication. Good examples for this chemical dimension will be probably the Delhi NCR, high PM 2.5 concentration, ozone pollution. Delhi during 2025 Diwali, 36 out of 38 monitoring stations recorded very high pollution levels in the red zone, which were indicating very poor to severe air quality. These are all chemical dimensions. The river Jamuna, industrial effluent and sewage result in oxygen depletion, so affect the biodiversity there. Now we come for the fourth dimension, that is socio-ecological dimensions of ecosystem imbalances. And it actually recognizes cities as coupled human and environment system. So human beings as well as the environment, they are co-shaping each other. Ecological degradation directly feeds back into social inequities, governance gaps, and health outcomes. Key processes involved, we can discuss unequal distribution of green and blue infrastructure. Poorer communities often face higher exposure to pollution and heat. Loss of cultural ecosystem services, sense of place, recreation, soft infrastructure, they are becoming almost negligible. Examples, we can take green space per capita in low income zones for Delhi is less than 1 square meter per person, whereas the standard WHO prescribes 9 meter square per person. Use of air purifier, which is becoming very common, but the lower income group people will have difficulty to have this. Chennai floods 2015. All of us we remember this flood, I believe. Poorest communities actually were most exposed due to this encroached wetlands, which was a decision from the governance side. But the result was borne by the communities. Next is the economic institutional dimensions of ecosystem imbalance. This dimension deals with economic models and governance systems that undervalue ecosystem services and externalize ecological costs. Imbalances persist when institutions fail to integrate ecology into planning. What are the key processes involved? GDP driven growth ignores the ecological limits. So we need to think about the growth but in a different terms. Fragmented governance between municipal, state, and environmental bodies. Short term infrastructure gains, which leads to long term ecological debt. And that is externalization, which people tend to forget or tend to ignore. Urban riverfront projects can be a very good example, which we have seen in the case of Sabarmati, where the floodplains were displaced by the concreting. We can also cite here the examples of weak enforcement of rules like Wetlands Conservation and Management Rules 2017, Coastal Regulation Zone Notification 2019. So, all these are very important institutional imbalances. And the final one is the temporal dimensions of ecosystem imbalance. And here lies the difference between human system and the natural system. Urban imbalances evolve over time with slow feedback loops that mask long term damage. Initially, we don't understand easily. Only from experiences we say these are going to happen. But when it happens, by that time, lots of time has already gone. Temporal lag between cause and effect delays corrective action. What are the key processes? Cumulative degradation of soil fertility, aquifers, and green cover. Climate change intensifies legacy impacts, which we are carrying from our forefathers, the previous decades. Certain things have been done wrongfully in the past, and that is now bearing the fruits, negative fruits. Thus, this and climate change is actually intensifying that. Inertia in governance and public awareness. These are the temporal dimensions. Temporal dimensions of ecosystem imbalance. There are some good examples. Land subsidence in Mexico City from decades of groundwater overuse. You remember this particular case, I believe. Disappearing lakes in Hyderabad from decades of encroachment. So, with time, it has been understood, and then it is very difficult to take action. Now, we will be discussing the other segments of this ecosystem imbalance, these dimensions, where we will be discussing the key significance of each one and key phrases associated with them. First one, as we have already discussed, is going to be biophysical. Biophysical imbalance reflects how urban form transform natural energy and water cycles, making cities hotter, drier, or more flood prone. And the keywords are microclimate, surface ceiling, hydrological imbalance, heat flags. Likewise, ecological one is talking about the species, functions, networking, and biotic homogenization, fragmentation, connectivity, species turnover are the keywords. For the chemical imbalance, the keywords will be urban biogeochemistry, pollution load, eutrophication, atmospheric chemistry. Socio-ecological, we always emphasize that ecosystem imbalance in urban areas never just physical. It's also having a social aspect. So, environmental justice, green equity, socio-ecological feedbacks, vulnerability are the key phrases. Economic institutional, we will be discussing under this particular dimension ecological economics, governance, fragmentation, policy disconnect, resource valuation, etc. As the temporal imbalance is actually teaching us that today's planning decisions determined ecological resilience decades from now. So it's very important. So accordingly, the keywords are path dependency, delayed feedback, urban resilience, tipping points. So with this, now we will be going for the last segment of the dimension wise ecosystem imbalance understanding, how to measure them, the key indicators. So for each one of them, biophysical and the others, we will see there are series of indicators mentioned like LST, impervious surface ratio, runoff coefficient, tree canopy cover. Each one of them have been discussed against the urban ecosystem imbalances. And let us see the methods through which we can measure them. Like LST, we can measure through satellite thermal imagery like Landsat, MODIS. Impervious surface ratio, we can do the NDVI and DBI. So, remote sensing classification will be helpful. Runoff coefficient, we can go for hydrological modeling, rainfall runoff data. We can use the gauges and GIS. Tree canopy cover, LIDAR or high resolution imagery will help us. Likewise, for the second dimension, ecological one, the indicators are species richness index, habitat fragmentation matrix, and native versus non-native species ratio. And the methods are field survey, camera traps, citizen science, GIS landscape metrics like FragStat will help us in habitat fragmentation. Species inventory identification will help us to calculate the percentage native versus non-native. We come to the chemical dimension, ambient PM 2.5 and NOxes, soil heavy metal concentration in the soil, that will be an aspect. Water body, the BOD, COD in the water body. So, what we can do, the methods, air quality monitoring stations will help us in the pollution aspect. Soil sampling and lab analysis will help us to understand the soil pollution. Spatial mapping will also be very much helpful to keep the data. Water BOD, COD we can go for water sampling, and in the lab we can analyze them, biochemical and the chemical oxygen demand we can analyze. In the socio-ecological, the indicators are blue-green space accessibility, heat, heat vulnerability index, and distributional equity of ecosystem services. And how they can be measured? Blue-green GIS buffer analysis and population. Heat vulnerability index can be measured through combined heat exposure data and demographic data, as well as the vulnerability data. Distributional equity of ecosystem services can be measured through the spatial overlay of ecosystem service maps. You can create those ecosystem service maps. Socioeconomic data that will measure the equity on top of it. Economic and institutional dimension of imbalance. We have the indicators like proportion of city budget for blue-green infrastructure. We can measure it through budget documentation analysis. We can look at the percentage allocation and trend over time. Implementation rate of ecosystem related policies. We can go for policy review. Institutional survey. We can do adopted enforced relevant policies that can be looked at. And the last indicator is the ecosystem services valuation. There are lots of valuation methods depending on the ecosystem services, benefit transfer, willingness to pay, and many others. And we can take advantage of GIS also to derive the spatial values. So that's the way we can do the economic and institutional dimension of ecosystem imbalance measurement. For the temporal dimensions, the indicators identified are the date of vegetation change, time series remote sense data like NDVI, trend analysis will be helpful. The second indicator, time lag between policy implementation and ecological response, because it's a temporal, so time lag is very important. Long-term monitoring data, we say longitudinal study. Policy implementation timeline calculates the delay. All these are going to help to identify that particular indicator. Crossing of resilience threshold is the last indicator under the temporal one. System level indicator monitoring will help us to get like habitat loss percentage per year. Threshold modeling. Threshold modeling is also going to help this particular measurement. So with this, we have today discussed the urban ecosystem imbalance. We have discussed about the urban critical zone, dimensions of ecosystem imbalances, and we have understood the key processes there, and we understood through the good examples. And lastly, we discussed the measurement of urban ecosystem imbalance and its key indicators. There are the reference list. Thank you.